You might be surprised, but Qatar and the United States never had any formal public security agreement. Coincidentally, when Israeli planes were attacking Qatar, 36 Rafale jets were also shining on Qatari bases. Security can never be outsourced, and the Arab states must have understood this by now. From Israel's point of view, there is no difference between Gaza and Qatar, because one has no defense at all, and the other's defense lies in American hands. In terms of technology, Arab countries are in the space age, but in terms of security, they remain in the Mohenjo-Daro age. The total population of the Asian Arab states is about 185 million, yet they don't have even one powerful army that could frighten their enemies. The most expensive and modern weapons are not meant to be just decoration. Even the worst democracies can win because their leaders are held accountable. After Qatar's defense agreements failed, Ukraine must also be wondering what kind of trust it placed in the U.S. when handing over its precious resources. If piles of weapons alone could guarantee security, Lockheed Martin would have its own country by now. The Prime Minister of Qatar, Mohammed bin Abdulrahman bin Jassim, who is also the Foreign Minister, has just completed meetings with the U.S. Secretary of State and President Donald Trump. Many issues were discussed, and Trump assigned his team some tasks to carry out jointly with Qatar. In a few days, reports will be made public, and information from the American side will come out. For now, what's reported in the media are just official statements. But it's impossible that Qatar did not raise the issue of American security guarantees, because when Qatar was attacked, it was American officers who were operating the air defense systems. Why was that the case? You'll learn this later in this vlog. We also need to look at what exactly was the agreement between the U.S. and Qatar. Back in 1992, they gave the impression that security cooperation agreements had been signed. The assumption was that Qatar, as a wealthy state, would invest, while the U.S., as a military power, would provide every kind of security. But the astonishing fact is that nobody knows the written conditions of that agreement. What exactly was signed? What were the bullet points? Nobody knows. The agreement was never made public. Even Qatar's 3.1 million citizens don't know what promises the U.S. made to them. Breaking those promises is now seen as America stabbing Qatar in the back. This is the difference between democracies and absolute monarchies. In autocracies, the people don't know what their rulers are doing at the top. Even when a major disaster happens, they don't know if the mistake was on their side or the enemy's, and they don't know how to pressure their government for a response. Before 1992, during the Gulf War, the U.S. forward base and air control headquarters for the Middle East was in Saudi Arabia, but in 1992 it was shifted to Doha. The details of this shift were kept hidden. Today, 10,000 American and European soldiers are stationed there, watching over U.S. interests in the Middle East and the Indian Ocean. No fighter jet, drone, or hostile projectile can pass without being noticed by this base, or so it is supposed to be. After 2012, Qatar also shopped heavily from the American and European weapons industry. It acquired the best U.S. Patriot PAC-3 air defense system, capable of intercepting fighter jets, ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles. On paper, this arrangement, along with the U.S. forward base, was more than enough to defend a tiny country like Qatar, especially since more than half its population lives in just one city, Doha. Qatar itself has about 20,000 troops, including some 3,000 in the Air Force. The Qatari Air Force owns aircraft that many countries can only dream of. 36 Rafale jets, about 20 Eurofighter Typhoons, and at least 30 F-15s. On paper, this is an impressive air force. But the problem is that Qatar's air defense is tied to the U.S. base near Doha. So for operations, surveillance, and defense, Qatar depends on American technical support. In 2022, the U.S. even designated Qatar as a major non-NATO ally. This means the Qatari air defense system sometimes had Americans manning the screens alongside Qatari officers. Trust and cooperation had been built over many years. But on September 9th, at 5:15 p.m., this trust was shattered. 15 Israeli fighter jets carried out 10 attacks on Doha. They flew 2,000 kilometers, bombed, and returned. On the way, they even refueled with help from British and American security sources. For Israel, there was no difference between Gaza and Qatar. Gaza has no defense, and Qatar's defense belongs to America. The shocking part is that despite Qatar's advanced air defense systems and U.S. bases, they supposedly didn't detect 15 Israeli fighter jets, all American-made, coming in and going out. This is impossible to believe. Worse, when the bombing was underway, everyone knew, but no one intercepted them. Even if we accept U.S.-Israeli collusion, ignoring Qatar's lavish air force and defense systems is absurd. The reality is that during the attack, American officers were on duty operating the systems. The same applies to United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Oman. Saudi Arabia, with a larger population, 37 million, has a stronger air force, around 350 modern multi-role jets and 20,000 personnel. But while they've been active bombing Yemen, can they perform against a professional military? That's doubtful. History shows repeated Arab failures. In 1967, Israel destroyed Egyptian and Syrian air forces on the ground. In 1981, Israel destroyed Iraq's nuclear reactor in minutes, despite Iraqi defenses. Israeli jets crossed Jordan and Saudi Arabia unhindered, dropped bombs, and returned safely. Arab states keep buying expensive weapons, but without building professional, disciplined armies. Saudi Arabia alone has signed $250 billion worth of arms deals in the last 25 years. But after Qatar's humiliation, these look like clay toys. The real threat to Arab states is not Yemen or Iran, it is Israel. And U.S. bases or agreements won't save them if Israel attacks. In fact, it's likely that U.S. weapons come with conditions that they can't be used against Israel. America's Middle East policy is designed with Israeli input, Mossad cooperation, and laws guaranteeing Israel a qualitative military edge. Mossad likely knows more about U.S. radar placements and weapon systems in the region than many U.S. advisors do. That's why Israel can strike any Arab country when it wants, with or without U.S. knowledge. Western governments may talk about Palestinian statehood and human rights, but mostly for appearances. Only Spain and Ireland have taken stronger action. Others punish their own citizens for waving Free Palestine placards. And even when they talk about recognizing a Palestinian state, they avoid two critical points: defining borders and granting the right to build an army. They leave these open to preserve Israel's advantage. Muslim states at the UN, including Pakistan, demand a Palestine based on pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. But Western powers never commit to such details. Meanwhile, younger Arab generations are increasingly vocal, which worries Israel and the U.S. That's why they're trying to restrict free speech, research, and social media algorithms. But in the long run, capitalism itself won't allow restrictions that cut profits. Qatar is a recent example. Secret agreements and hidden arrangements collapsed under the stress of attack. If things had been public and in writing, Qatar would be negotiating from a stronger position today. After Israeli strikes, reports suggested Qatar was reassessing its security ties with the U.S. But Qatar officially denied it, calling it disinformation. Instead, they insisted relations with the U.S. are stronger than ever, which is ironic, given that Israeli jets bombed them for 10 minutes straight. Clearly, Qatar won't take any military steps against Israel. The joint Arab summit in Doha on September 14th to 15th will stick to diplomacy and economic pressure. Militarily, they simply can't respond in an Iranian style. Axios reported that Qatar, through Trump, demanded Netanyahu guarantee that Israel won't attack again. But Netanyahu will never make such a promise, especially since his popularity in Israel has risen precisely because of attacks on Muslim countries. The UAE, dependent on Israel and the U.S., didn't even recall its ambassador. They merely asked for an explanation. Meanwhile, Spain pulled its ambassador from Tel Aviv and imposed sanctions on Israeli ministers. This shows the difference in courage. One big reason Arab rulers can't act strongly is their internal rivalries. Every monarch or emir has family rivals waiting for an opportunity. They need U.S. and Israeli intelligence to keep those threats in check. That's why they remain compromised. Saudi Arabia's MBS, for example, sidelined his cousin Mohammed bin Nayef, who was the real crown prince, and keeps him in detention. The popular son of King Faisal, Saud bin Faisal, could win an election if there were one. In Jordan, King Abdullah's own brother, Prince Hamza, once challenged him but was arrested in 2021 and stripped of his title. Similar vulnerabilities exist across the Gulf states. That's why none of these rulers can afford democracy or transparency. Whenever Islamic or democratic movements like the Muslim Brotherhood gain ground, the U.S. and Israel crush them. That's why the rulers of Arab states are all compromised. Until genuine democratic change happens, they will remain dependent on foreign protection. Meanwhile, around the world, America's security guarantees are being mocked after Qatar's experience. Ukraine, in particular, must be worried. In April, it signed a vague agreement with the U.S., believing it meant security guarantees. In reality, it was just about economic projects. Ukraine handed over its resources to the U.S. in exchange for the illusion of protection. Even Zelensky begged Trump for clear security commitments, but Trump refused, offering only economic partnership. Ukraine was forced to treat that as security. Now Ukraine, Taiwan, Japan, and the Philippines must be wondering if Qatar, after giving billions in investments and even gifting a golden Boeing 747 worth $400 million, wasn't protected. Then, what chance do they have? Saudi Arabia, too, must be rethinking its $1 trillion NEOM project near Israel's borders. Should they rely on U.S. protection, or spend some of that money on real security? In the past, secret U.S.-Saudi agreements reshaped history. But today, with Israel as the linchpin of U.S. Middle East policy, Arab rulers' dependence leaves them weak.